And we rise up, people. It's time's up, people. You can talk all you want, but it won't change a thing. I wanna know what you do.
The democratic self-government experiment that was started in the United States over 200 years ago has gotten completely corrupted.
We are not being listened to. We, the real people, are not being listened to.
When people say we can buy elections, which we've seen happening, and when we see people say we don't want to let people vote, those are all little signs that pretty big signs that our democracy is in trouble.
The move to amend's amendment that we're promoting will basically break the iron grip that wealthy individuals and corporations have over our democracy and allow the people to rule as they're supposed to.
Today, we have an un-American attack on that creed of equality.
You can't be free if you don't have a home.
It's time for an intervention, y'all.
Money is not political speech.
Previously on the Up and Up with Jody Newell.
You know, and many corporations are giving about the same amount to both parties, you know, because they can afford it. It's a business expense. Those folks are, you know, they're not partisan. They're super cross-partisan, and they don't care at all. So on one hand, yes, like the Republicans are worse on this in terms of their leadership. But on the other hand, you know, a lot of it is that it's like the whole system is broken and corrupt. And the biggest issue, I think, is that people don't think that there's anything we can do about it. I mean, certainly there's a number of nonprofit corporations in Washington, D.C. that I will not name, but that we would probably consider to be like on our same team as, you know, progressives, but who have, you know, actively worked against our amendment in Congress, and you know, and it comes back to us that, you know, this concern was raised and that concern was raised. If you say that it only applies to for-profit corporations, which has been, you know, like Bernie Sanders introduced an amendment that said that some years ago, he never reintroduced it because it's problematic, because it creates a giant loophole. Political action committees are nonprofit corporations. So you have to just make it, you know, straightforward and clear, which is why I think that everyday people get it, because it's common sense. Corporations are not people. And yes, it's true that now at this point, we have 135 years of this being, you know, the way that corporations are seen under the law, although that's, you know, expanded over time, but the beginning of it goes back 135 years. So yes, we are talking about rooting out a very, very deep taproot in our legal system that means, you know, a lot of change. And, you know, so frankly, I think that the liberals, the Democrats, you know, and any good faith Republicans that we're talking to that have concerns, that's what they're talking about. And the problem is that the paradigm of Capitol Hill isn't really set up to make systemic change. You know, they make tiny little tweaks and they call it a day. And that's not good enough, you know?
The words of journalist Molly Ivins ring true. It is possible to read the history of this country as one long struggle to extend the liberties established in our Constitution to everyone in America. In other words, who, according to our laws and culture, gets to be considered a person? The law creates legal personhood, and movements create law and change culture. So, how have the courts passed laws to shape our culture? That history goes way back before Citizens United. 1819, Dartmouth College versus Woodward, Supreme Court case, turned a corporate charter from a government-granted charter to a contract. This ruling gave corporations standing within the Constitution. 1886, Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad. Though the court did not rule on corporate personhood, the decision was subsequently cited as a precedent to hold that a private corporation is entitled to the same 14th Amendment rights of due process and equal protection as human beings. This makes it impossible for us to make laws that treat local businesses any differently than giant multinational corporations, even if their business practices are deemed to be harmful to workers, the environment and communities, or if they have a history of violating the law. Hale versus Henkel, 1906. The court granted corporations the Fourth Amendment search and seizure protection. Dodge versus Ford Motor Company, 1919. The Michigan Supreme Court says the business corporation is organized and carried on primarily for the profit of the stockholders. Stockholder primacy is established. The purpose of the corporation, according to the court, is no longer to serve the public good, as it had been. It is now to maximize profit for shareholders above all else. Pennsylvania Coal Company versus Mahon, 1922. Corporations get the Fifth Amendment takings clause, meaning if you pass a regulation that impacts a corporation's ability to make a profit, that is deemed a taking, and they can sue for the right to future profits lost. This creates a chilling effect, and local and state governments become much more hesitant to pass laws in the public interest for fear that corporations can claim loss of potential profits that cities and states will be on the hook to pay. Buckley versus Vallejo, 1976. The Supreme Court rules that spending money to influence elections is protected under the First Amendment, in effect saying that money is speech. Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, 2010.
Today, the Supreme Court of Chief Justice John Roberts declared that because of the alchemy of its 19th century predecessors in deciding that corporations had all the rights of people, any restrictions on how these corporate beings spend their money on political advertising are unconstitutional.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Up and Up. I'm Jody Newell, and I am very excited today to bring on a guest who is actually a friend of mine, a friend in the movement to get money out of politics. Her name is Caitlin Saposi Belknap. And Caitlin, why don't you introduce yourself? Thank you for coming on.
Hi, Jody. Thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor to be on your show, and I really appreciate all the work that you've been doing for years in this area. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about it. Let's see. I live in Sacramento, California. I grew up in New Mexico, though, and I moved to Amends National Director. I've been working with Move to Amend since we were founded. I'm one of our co-founders. And before that, I worked with an organization called Democracy Unlimited of Humboldt County in far Northern California. So I've been doing work against corporate personhood and the various ways that that plays out in our society for over almost 20 years, actually.
Damn. So tell me about, I think it's probably fits in pretty well here, right? Because we're talking about working within the system and like working, okay, so let me just ask the question. But we just had HR1 that was introduced, and we know that there's, of course, there's campaign finance proponent to that, component to that. Words are things, they mean stuff. Okay, and it's interesting because, of course, when, you know, both Move to Amend and Wolfpack and a lot of different organizations that are working toward this understand that, you know, we had a Supreme Court ruling. The only thing that is above the Supreme Court is the Constitution. They are beholden to the Constitution. That's their whole kind of point, right? That's their shtick. And so if we're making legislation, I'm always a little suspect in saying, okay, well, now is that really going to work? Because is it going to hold up against these previous Supreme Court rulings, right? What is your opinion on that? How have you looked over closely? I haven't gotten too far into it, so I admit, you know, I don't have a whole lot to say about it. I'm just kind of suspicious.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so two things. One, to talk to your point, but then there are some real problems with HR1 that I'd love to raise and make sure your listeners know about.
Yeah.
So, firstly, you're absolutely right that at the end of the day, a constitutional amendment is what's going to be necessary. And any legislation that is passed that at all is seen as a limitation on corporate power, whether we're talking about the campaign finance realm or potentially something else. I mean, like Medicare for All is a good example too. Like Medicare for All passes, and then what is going to stop the Supreme Court from gutting huge parts of it, if not all of it? So that's true for HR1 as well, that without a constitutional amendment, and frankly, we need more than just the We the People amendment, right? We also need a constitutional right to vote. We don't have a constitutional right to vote in the United States of America. We have a few different amendments that talk about ways that you cannot limit people's rights to vote, ability to vote, but just a foundational constitutional right to vote, which would then allow for there to be standards that would be put forward by the federal government, which right now we don't have. So every state kind of can do whatever. And then we see that, you know, some states are in the business of disenfranchising people, mostly people of color. And so that there's some really strong and good pieces in HR1 around gerrymandering, around voting protections that are important. But without a constitutional right to vote, then it ultimately is going to be in the hands of the Supreme Court to decide how much of HR1 is actually viable and going to stand, right? And it's not just the Supreme Court, right? Everybody who is working against voter protection and against the ability to protect against gerrymandering, that's who's going to take it into court and make the argument that, you know, Congress didn't have the authority to pass HR1. And part of what we need to do is give them that authority through constitutional amendments. So that's one piece. You know, I think it's good to move it forward, but I also think that I'm also often disappointed by the fact that Congress members who are the champions of HR1 sort of sidestep that issue and make it sound as though, you know, more is going to be the outcome, even if it were to pass through the Senate, than I think actually would be what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, it's sidestepping the issue of the fact that the system is corrupt. And so it's saying, here, from within the system, we can fix the system. And actually, the system isn't designed to serve regular people. The system is designed to serve the people with the most money. And that's what it's doing. And it's working just fine under those ground rules.
Mm-hmm.
But then also, some of the pieces in HR1 are really, really problematic. And I want to give a shout out to the Green Party and the People's Party, who have been the ones who have pointed this out. So HR1 includes language that will abolish the general election campaign block grants that parties can access when they win 5% of the vote in the previous presidential election. So it gets rid of that, which makes it a lot harder for independent parties to get public funding.
Mm-hmm.
And they also will replace those, the general election block grants, where each qualified candidate receives a lump sum of public funding for campaign expenses. And just as a quick aside, the direction that we need to go with campaign finance is publicly funded elections. And so the measures in HR1 that move that take the pieces of publicly funded elections that we already have that are very tiny and really need to be expanded is really problematic. And remember, HR1 was written by the leadership of the Democratic Party. So this is, you know, the Democratic Party putting forward proposals that are going to undermine independent parties that they are, you know, so it's like, on one hand, moving forward some really important voter protection legislation, on the other hand, trying to slide in some legislation that will make it harder for independent candidates. And then there's a couple more things which are even worse. It's going to eliminate, if it passes, it'll eliminate the limits on donations and expenditures that candidates can receive and make. So that's more money in politics. Right. And then most just outrageous is that it will inflate the amount of money that national party committees can give to candidates. So right now, political parties, the committees of parties are allowed to give $5,000 to candidates. It will raise that to $100 million that political parties can give. So basically what that means is you've got an independent candidate who's maybe getting some traction, whether they're, you know, literally an independent, or maybe they're a member of an independent party, and they're gaining traction. Or it actually could also be a progressive Democrat, or, you know, or a Republican too, who, you know, maybe in a primary process. And right now the party can only give monetarily. I mean, we know that the parties find other ways to, you know, whether it's, you know, blackball consultants who are working with them and make threats and things like that. But at least financially, they're not really allowed to be big players, because $5,000 isn't that much money. But going forward, if HR1 passes, there will be $100 million that, you know, say the DNC could drop into a progressive Democrat running against, you know, a party, a beloved party leader like a Nancy Pelosi, say, and, you know, blow them out of the water. So, you know, I know that we need so much of what is in HR1 in terms of the voter protection and the gerrymandering, and it's really important. But at the same time, you know, this is obviously not being talked about very much. It's not even really being talked about that much in progressive media, a lot of which is, you know, supportive of the dominant two-party system when you look underneath it. And so yeah, there's some really bad stuff in HR1, which, you know, if Republicans were doing this, people would be absolutely outraged. But because it's Democrats, they kind of either look the other way or can't believe it's true, or just don't even dig.
Yeah. I mean, it's really sad because on the one hand, you really want to support the things that are good. And I think this happens in a lot of, I mean, I know this happens in a lot of bills where things get snuck in and, kind of go beneath the radar because the overall, overall what it's trying to accomplish is a good thing. And so you want to support it. And, nobody, I think, I can see why people wouldn't want to point out things or whatever, but these are huge things. I mean, these are not just small tweaks. These are not just whatever. These seem like very significant. I mean, going from $5,000 to $100 million that
right?
a party can put in. What are you?
Campaign finance, that's the part that's even more.
Right.
Like here is a campaign finance protection bill. And, meanwhile, we're basically going to make it so that the parties themselves, which, what Americans really are like super excited about the RNC and the DNC
right.
or state parties, I mean, those are hugely corrupt organizations.
Right.
And to give them, I mean, even $1 million, but $100 million, I mean, that's unfathomable for a candidate to fight against. So it would really set us back.
I can't even think in my head, how did that I just, anyway, I don't know. I'm not in the room. Clearly I'm not in the room when these conversations are going on. 100 million. Oh my God. Absolutely insane. And you're right. I have heard this in a few different places. I want to say probably like three or four different outlets, and they're all like independent, you know what I mean? Lefty news, that I've actually heard this called out on. And aside from that, yeah, people aren't talking about it at all. So yes, I mean, there are some good things in the bill, but I think we also need to be very sober minded and look into what's kind of below that, what's beneath the surface, right?
So, I mean, if folks are, to give an action and not just a complaint, I know that a lot of people are organizing for HR1 or setting up lobby meetings. Indivisible, has made this like their big issue. And it's really important that folks raise this. And again, if you go to the Green Party's website, you can kind of get these stats that I just read off so that you would, have them before.
I have an article that will be up on the Counterpunch website either tomorrow or Thursday probably about the campaign finance section of HR1, which is an omnibus voting reform bill. Has 3 sections, one on voting, a lot of good measures in there, make it easier to vote, make it harder to prevent people from voting. And it's got an ethics section, which has some good things like requiring presidential candidates to disclose their tax returns. But buried in the middle of it is a campaign finance reform that I say is a reform that doesn't reform. One thing it does is increase by 5 times the amount of money you've got to raise to qualify, which puts it beyond the reach of third parties like the Green Party. Now, under the current public funding of presidential campaigns, the presidential primary matching funds, you have to raise $5,000 in 20 states in contributions of $250 or less. And our campaign was the only campaign that qualified and applied for those funds. The major party candidates don't apply these days because if you accept public money, there's a cap on how much private money you can spend, which this year was about $52 million. And for the major party candidates, that's not enough. The cost of campaigning has just gone up through the roof so much that they haven't been taking it in recent elections. So that's one problem. It basically excludes third parties. And then it provides a 6-to-1 match for the money you do raise. Now it's a 1-to-1 match, which may sound good, but when you think about it, what that does is increase the disparity between candidates 7-fold. So if suppose the Green Party barely qualifies at $500,000, but a small major party candidate like Marianne Williamson or Julian Castro, they raised about $5 million in small contributions. So multiply both of those qualified amounts of funds by 6 times. So the Green would get $350,000 or $3.5 million. And, a candidate like Julian Castro would get $45 million. So the disparity increases from 4.5 million to 31.5 million, which is a 7-fold increase. So that's another problem with it. It also increases the amount that national party committees can contribute to presidential campaigns. Now it's $5,000. Each national party has 3 national committees, the national committee itself and their Senate and House campaign committees. That increases from $5,000 under this HR1 proposal to $100 million. And what that does is open more opportunities for big donors, because while you're limited to $5,600, $2,800 for the primary, $2,800 for the general, to the candidates committee, you can give over $109,000 to the national committees in 2020. So if you gave to all 3, it'd be about $330,000. So that's big donor money. And then there's more problems. As a result of decisions like Citizens United and McCutcheon in 2014, they have victory funds now that are joint committees of the candidate committee for president, the national committee, and state party committees. So rich folks could give over $620,000 to Biden's victory fund. Trump's was a little under $500,000. Depends on how many state parties participated. Now, the little people can't participate in that, but it's just more opportunity. And then, of course, you've got unlimited contributions people can make to super PACs and dark money that's laundered through 501c4 nonprofits and passed on to super PACs. And those are so-called independent expenditures, but everybody sort of winks at that, knowing that these super PACs are usually set up by former campaign staffers, and they don't need to be directly instructed to know what the message needs to be put out there.
It's important if you are doing any work to advocate for HR1, these pieces need to be taken out before it is passed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, and you know what, that's, we're pretty much at time, but here, I want to give you a minute, because essentially what we do at the end, my show is for activists, whatever. And everyone essentially ends with a call to action. So throw it out there. Where can people find out about Move to Amend? What is your, big ask at this point? How can they support?
Yeah, so our website is movetoamend.org, and coming there and signing our petition, which we use when we do have lobby meetings at the federal and state level to say, this many people in your district support this amendment. So that's kind of like the easiest thing to do, and you don't even have to put in any time. Just sign it and share it with as many people as possible, because the more names that we have on those lists, the more powerful we are when we go into these meetings. And then of course, joining with us, we are grassroots based, so we have chapters all over the country. You can start a Move to Amend group in your community. You can connect with one if there already is one. You can see kind of where they are if you go to the Move to Amend site. The work that we are doing right now, because the amendment was just introduced, is focusing mostly on Congress and we have a list of about 135 target offices that we think are the most likely candidates, and that's where we're focusing. So if you go to movetoamend.org/117 for the 117th Congress, 117 campaign, you can see kind of who our targets are, and if your congressperson is a target, you can help us get them on board. And then if your congressperson is not a target, that just means that we've said that they're one to potentially get to a little later, but you could get started right now, and we would certainly support you. And then later on this year, kind of after we've done our spring focus on the amendment and hopefully gotten to 100, we will also be doing some of our other, kind of, like I said, education, movement building work. And so there are other ways to plug in if you're not a lobbyist and that doesn't float your boat. There's definitely other ways to get involved.
Awesome. All right. This is very exciting. I can't wait to see what happens with the amendment. We'll see. 5th time's the charm. And maybe, I don't know.
Well, maybe not this Congress, but maybe 6th time. We have to get introduced in the Senate too. So helping us with that. And then, a lot of times these things are like impossible until all of a sudden they're inevitable, right? So that's like the critical mass that we're working to build, and every little piece that we add onto that bonfire helps, get those flames higher. So I don't know exactly when it will happen, but probably not in the 117th Congress, but I would love to, move forward in some big ways. And, at some point we will reach a breaking point, because what is happening right now, where we have no meaningful say over our elected officials, something's got to give. And so that's part of it, is just making sure that we're there to help make the connections for people about why this is happening. So instead of, immigrants being blamed, or, whatever it is, whatever divide and conquer technique the elites are using against us, we can say, no, this is what's happening, and this is why, and this is what the solution would be, and be there to do it.
I love it. I love it. All right. Thank you for coming on, and thank you everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe, and if you have the means, please support us on Patreon. It's Patreon.com/Real Progressives. Bye, y'all. Signing off.
Move to Amend is the only organization right now that is very clear on what needs to be done with respect to the constitutional amendment. Specifically, we declare, or we want declared, that corporations are not people. And we also want to declare that money is not speech. In every other organizations, they're mostly concentrated on Citizens United, money is not speech. To that, we always have to ask a question. How much better was our politics pre-Citizens United? Not much better. And the reason it wasn't better is that second portion was missing: corporate personhood.
It is clear that this country is suffering from a crisis that is deeper than the economic crisis or the ecological crisis. We are suffering from a crisis of democracy. And I say that because there are supermajorities on issue after issue, whether you're talking about healthcare, foreign policy, economic questions, education, or political reform, that clearly support substantive reforms, yet those reforms have not come into effect.
Every single one of our fundamental human needs are being violated on a daily basis. And until we get democracy back in this country, through overturning Citizens United and overturning corporate constitutional rights, we're not going to have a democracy that can function for the 300 million plus human beings in our United States.
I've been watching it for some 30 years now, but I never really felt like I needed to do anything about it until Citizens United.
We should be in the Capitol throwing all the lobbyists out, meeting with our congresspeople and telling them what we would like them to do to make this a better country.
If we, the people, don't do something about corporate constitutional rights, that not only our government, the United States of America, is going to go down in flames, but we are going to take the entire planet with us.
We have to be less vertical and more horizontal. And the horizontal there is focusing on a democracy movement that will help all of us achieve the individual solutions we want.
There's going to be considerable opposition, and there's going to be opposition within the corporate media, and strong opposition, which is going to make the job a little harder. But never underestimate the power of the people when they understand the message. Never underestimate that. I think that this is something that can be done quite quickly. I think it's something that can be done rather efficiently. It's just going to require a large enough parade. It's going to require a large enough people to understand the core concepts. And that's the real work that we have to do right now, is hit that critical tipping point, which is probably around 20 or 30% of the voting populace actually understanding the issue.
It's really critical that we do more and we not just wait for elected officials to take care of this for us. This is what every single social movement that has come before us has done when they recognize that the system is really flawed and it's not working and the people in power are not going to self-correct. But it's time for the people to step in, and there's actually a process in our Constitution to do this. This isn't new. It doesn't happen very often, but whenever there is a system that is so out of balance, we've seen people's movements come together and respond by inserting human rights or correcting the issue to make clear that the priority needs to be on the people.
many gifts can a congressman take and somehow remain a good man? And how many times must good parents cry 'cause their little ones must sleep in a van? How many bribes can corporations give before their bribes are forever banned?